They say that by 50, we've lived enough to not be surprised by anything anymore. I thought so too. At 53, with a successful therapy practice, a 25-year marriage, and a college-graduated son, I believed I had built a solid, predictable life. As a therapist, I spent 2 decades listening to other people's secrets, helping them rebuild lives shattered by lies. Ironic, isn't it? I, who could see the destructive patterns in others' lives, was unable to see what was happening inside my own home. My name is Marina, and this is the story of the day my castle of lies came crumbling down. The morning of our wedding anniversary began like so many others. Eduardo had already left for the office when I woke up. 25 years together, and he was still the same workaholic he had always been. My husband had built one of the largest construction companies in the region, and that success had always justified his absences, his constant trips, those mysterious phone calls he would take in his locked office. Thomas, our 24-year-old son, had returned home a few months ago after finishing law school. He was preparing for the bar exam while working as an assistant in his father's office. They had always been so close, or so I thought. "Mom, don't forget the meeting with the caterer today." Thomas reminded me during breakfast as he reviewed some documents. The wedding anniversary party was a surprise I was preparing for Eduardo. 25 years deserved a celebration, even if our marriage was no longer that fairy tale it had been at the beginning. I had felt Eduardo growing distant for years, but I attributed it to fatigue, stress, middle age. How many times in my office had I heard women speaking exactly as I thought? "It's just a phase." Men are like that. At least he's a good father. How blind we are when we want to be. That afternoon, I reviewed the final details for the party that would take place in 3 days, an intimate celebration, just for family and close friends. 50 people at most. The building's party room was reserved. The catering confirmed. Personalized party favors ordered. Eduardo thought we were just going out to dinner, just the 2 of us. The party would be my way of saying that, despite the ups and downs, I still believed in our marriage. I was finalizing details with the decorator when my cell phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "We need to talk about Eduardo. It's urgent." I ignored it. Probably one of his clients with the wrong number. Minutes later, another message. "Please, Marina, I'm Lucia. It's about your family and mine." Lucia. The name meant nothing to me at that moment. I blocked the number and continued with my tasks. It wouldn't be the first time some woman tried to create problems for Eduardo. He was an attractive, successful man. That attracted gazes, envy, obsessions. At least that's what I told myself. In the days leading up to the party, I noticed Tomas becoming increasingly nervous. He had always been a sensitive boy, very similar to me in his introspective personality, different from his extroverted and confident father. But there was something different about him now. Deep, dark circles under his eyes, whispered phone conversations, glances that avoided mine. "Is everything all right, son?" I asked the night before the party as he pushed food around, his plate without interest. "Of course, Mom. I'm just tired. Work at the office. You know how demanding Dad is." I believed him, or wanted to believe him. As a mother, I always felt I knew my son better than anyone else. As a therapist, I should have noticed the signs of someone carrying a secret too heavy to bear. The day of the party arrived. The venue was magnificent, decorated in gold and burgundy tones. Our favorite colors, scented candles, flower arrangements, our photographs scattered across the memory table. 25 years of history told in images. Eduardo and I young at the altar, Me pregnant with Thomas. The three of us on various trips, birthdays, graduations. Eduardo arrived from work at 7 in the evening, and I convinced him to dress up for our special dinner. In the elevator, on the way to what he thought was the building lobby, I held his hand and felt it cold, trembling. "Are you okay?" I asked, adjusting his tie, a gift I had bought especially for that night. "Yes, just a difficult day at work when..." The elevator doors opened directly into the party room, and everyone shouted, "Surprise!" I saw something in his eyes that I'll never forget. It wasn't surprise. It was panic. The party started off lively. Despite Eduardo's strange reaction, he recovered quickly, smiling, hugging guests, acting as the perfect host he had always been at social events. But I knew him too well not to notice that something was wrong. His eyes constantly scanned the room, as if looking for someone. His smile never reached his eyes, and he drank more than usual. Around 10 o'clock, when the DJ announced it was time for speeches, I saw Eduardo whisper something in Tomas's ear. My son turned pale. I saw his eyes well up with tears as he shook his head at his father. Eduardo seemed to be insisting on something, his expression a mixture of pleading and determination. Finally, Eduardo took a glass and a spoon, tinkling the crystal to get everyone's attention. The room gradually fell silent. "Friends and family, thank you for being here on this special night," he began, his voice slightly choked. 25 years beside this extraordinary woman deserve to be celebrated. Applause, smiles. Me, by his side, feeling my heart race with emotion. Despite the difficulties, the periods of distance, there was my husband, the man I chose to share my life with, about to declare his love in front of everyone we loved. "Marina has always been the pillar of our family," he continued. "She was always the one who kept everything running when I was absent." An uncomfortable silence settled in. I noticed some exchanged glances among the guests. And it's out of respect for this incredible woman that I can no longer continue living a lie. His voice trembled. "I have a confession to make." It was at that exact moment that it happened. Before Eduardo could continue, a guttural sound like a choked sob echoed through the room. Tomas, our son, standing a few meters away from us, had tears running down his face. His shoulders shook with contained crying. And then, without saying a word, he turned and ran out of the room. I made a move to follow him, but Eduardo's hand grabbed my wrist firmly. "Let him go, Marina. He already knows what I'm going to say." That moment froze in my memory. The confused murmur of the guests, the background music that suddenly seemed absurdly inappropriate, the grip of Eduardo's hand on my wrist, and the absence of Tomas, who had always been between us, literally and figuratively. "What are you talking about, Eduardo?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure, aware of the curious stares upon us. He took a deep breath, took a large sip of champagne, and looked directly into my eyes. "I have another family, Marina." 4 words. 4 words that destroyed 25 years. "In Puerto Madero," he continued, his voice now firm, as if each word he said freed him from a weight. "Lucia and I have been together for 18 years. We have 2 children, Valentina, who's 17, and Mateo, who's 15. The room spun around me. I heard gasps, muffled exclamations, the tinkling of a glass breaking on the floor. But everything seemed distant, as if I were submerged in water. "I didn't plan for it to be this way," Eduardo continued. "I met Lucia on a business trip to Buenos Aires. It was different from anything I had ever felt before. I tried to end it several times, but I couldn't. And then she got pregnant with Valentina. Each word was a stab. 18 years. Our daughter, no, his daughter with that woman, was 17. That meant that when we were celebrating our 7th wedding anniversary, when I thought we had finally overcome the 5-year crisis, he was already building another parallel life. Why now? Was all I could ask, my voice an almost inaudible whisper. Because I can't stand living divided anymore. Because our children deserve the truth. Because... He hesitated, his eyes watering. Because Lucia is sick. Terminal cancer. She has a few months to live. And I promised I wouldn't keep our children hidden anymore. At that moment, something inside me broke irreparably. It wasn't just the betrayal of almost 2 decades. It was realizing that my husband was crying for another woman at our anniversary party. It was understanding that he had chosen that moment, in front of our family and friends, to humiliate me in this way. It was comprehending that my son already knew everything and had been carrying this secret alone. I remember looking around at the shocked faces of our guests, friends of decades, family members, co-workers, all witnessing my public humiliation. I saw pity in their eyes, and morbid curiosity too. I didn't give Eduardo the pleasure of seeing me crumble. 23 years as a therapist had taught me to maintain composure in the most difficult situations. I had heard confessions of adultery, abuse, addictions. I had helped people rebuild themselves after devastating trauma. But nothing had prepared me to be the protagonist of my own tragedy. "Thank you for your honesty, Eduardo," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I think the party is over." I turned and walked to the exit, head held high, ignoring the whispers intensifying behind me. Only when the elevator doors closed did I allow the tears to come. And they came like a tropical storm. Violent, devastating, uncontrollable. I arrived at our apartment, no, my apartment now, and found Tomas's bedroom door locked. I knocked softly. Son, it's me. Please open up." Silence. Then, the sound of the lock turning. When the door opened, I saw my son as I had never seen him before. He looked like he had aged 10 years in that one night. His eyes, so similar to mine, were red and swollen. "How long have you known?" I asked, entering the room and closing the door behind me. He collapsed onto the bed, his body curved as if carrying an invisible weight. 3 months, he confessed, his voice hoarse. "I found documents in his office, monthly bank transfers to an account in Buenos Aires, photos of them, of his other family, on his cell phone that he left unlocked." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, feeling a pang of betrayal from my son as well. "How could I, Mom?" He raised his eyes to me, full of pain. "How could I destroy everything you had built? The life you thought you had? I thought that by confronting Dad first, he would end this madness, that he would choose us." Sat next to him on the bed, taking his hands in mine. "It's not your responsibility to protect me, Thomas. It never was. But I tried, Mom. I swear I tried. I confronted him 2 weeks ago. I threatened to tell you everything if he didn't end it with her. And he promised he would resolve it. I never imagined that resolving for him meant this public humiliation." I hugged my son tightly, feeling his sobs against my shoulder. At that moment, it wasn't me who needed comfort. It was him, my boy, carrying such a heavy secret alone, trying to protect the family he believed he had. The sound of the front door opening interrupted us. Eduardo had arrived. We exchanged a look, Tomas and I, a silent communication that only mother and son understand. "Go to the guest room and lock the door," he said, surprising me with the role reversal. Suddenly, he was the one wanting to protect me. "Don't talk to him today. Not in this state." I nodded, grateful for not having to face Eduardo that night. I needed time to process, to think clearly. As a therapist, I always advised my patients not to make important decisions in the heat of emotion. Now, I needed to follow my own advice. In the guest room, lying on the lonely bed, I relived every moment of the last 18 years, looking for signs I should have seen. The frequent trips to Buenos Aires that always extended longer than planned, the phone calls taken in another room, the constantly changing cell phone password, the emotional distance I attributed to stress, age, routine. How could I have been so blind? I, who helped people see the truths they refused to see. The answer was simple and painful, because I didn't want to see, because it was more comfortable to believe in the life I had built than to face the possibility that everything was a lie. I spent the night awake, listening to the sounds of the muffled argument between father and son in the living room. Male, voices occasionally rising, followed by periods of tense silence. At some point, I heard the front door slam shut. Then, footsteps in the hallway. A pause in front of the room where I was. And finally, the sound of the main bedroom door closing. Eduardo had stayed. I didn't know if that was good or bad. Part of me wanted him to disappear, to go back to his other family, to spare me the confrontation that would inevitably come. Another part wanted to scream, to break things, to demand explanations for every lie, every moment stolen from me. Morning arrived mercilessly, bringing with it the cruel clarity that illuminated an undeniable truth. My 25-year marriage had been, in large part, a farce, and I needed to decide what to do with the wreckage. I woke up determined to face Eduardo with dignity. My therapist head had taken control during the sleepless night, cataloging emotions, planning approaches, preparing myself for the most difficult conversation of my life. But the apartment was empty. On the kitchen table, a white envelope with my name written in Eduardo's elegant handwriting. Inside, a 5-page letter confessing everything, asking for forgiveness, explaining the inexplicable, and informing me that he would spend 2 weeks in Buenos Aires, putting things in order, and then return so we could talk about the future. At the end of the letter, a phrase that chilled me. "There are more things we need to talk about when I return. Things about Thomas, about us, about the past, that you also tried to bury." What did he mean by that? What secrets of mine did Eduardo think he knew? And what did it have to do with Thomas? I put the letter in a drawer and did what I always did in difficult moments. I continued. I called my office and canceled all patients for the next 2 weeks, citing a family emergency. I began contacting the most competent lawyers in the city. As a therapist, I knew the best ones for each situation. And then finally I called Thomas. "We need to talk, son," I said when he answered, his voice still hoarse from someone who had cried a lot. "Not about yesterday, not about your father, about what he wrote in the letter he left, about the past that, according to him, I also tried to bury." Silence on the other end of the line, so long that I began to think the call had dropped. "Tomas? I'm on my way, Mom." He finally responded, his voice strangely controlled. "There are things you need to know. Things I discovered when I was investigating Dad. About you. About me." The tone in my son's voice sent a chill down my spine. Something told me that Eduardo's confession the night before had been just the beginning. That there were layers upon layers of secrets yet to be revealed. And that, when everything came to light, nothing would be the same as before. My castle of lies hadn't just crumbled. It had never really existed. While waiting for Tomas to arrive, I opened a bottle of wine. It was barely 10 in the morning, but social conventions seemed irrelevant after the previous night. I sat on the apartment terrace, observing the city that never stops, people going about their normal lives, oblivious to the earthquake that had destroyed mine. My thoughts drifted to 28 years ago, when I met Eduardo. I was 25, freshly graduated in psychology, full of dreams and ideals. I had just ended a complicated relationship with Miguel, my college sweetheart, and was determined to focus on my career. Eduardo appeared at a party of a mutual friend. Charming, self-assured, 8 years older, and already successful. It was an overwhelming passion, the kind that overshadows everything around it. In 6 months we were engaged. In a year, married. When I discovered my pregnancy with Tomás 9 months after the wedding, I felt my life was complete. I never told Eduardo about Miguel, about how devastating our breakup had been for me. How I had gone to look for him one last time, weeks before meeting Eduardo, in a desperate attempt at reconciliation. How he had refused to see me, sending his younger sister to tell me he was in another relationship, that I should move on. His sister, what was her name? A Spanish name. Luz? Luna? No, Lucia. Lucia Vega. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. Lucia. Eduardo's mistress had the same name as Miguel's sister. Could it be possible? Was it a cruel coincidence, or the doorbell rang, interrupting my train of thought? It was Tomás, pale, his red eyes betraying a sleepless night. Without saying a word, I hugged my son tightly, feeling his body tremble against mine. "Let's sit down, Mom," he finally said, gently pulling away. "What I have to tell you isn't easy." We poured more wine. Some secrets need the cushioning that only alcohol provides. "Do you remember when I started working at Dad's office 3 months ago?" He began, eyes fixed on the wine glass. "On the second day, he asked me to organize some old files. I found a locked folder in his drawer. The key was hidden behind a picture on the wall, the one you gave him when I graduated. The symbolism didn't escape me. The picture that celebrated our family, hiding the key that would reveal its destruction. Inside the folder were documents about a real estate property in Buenos Aires, regular bank transfers, and he hesitated. A DNA test. DNA test, I repeated, confused. Between Eduardo and the children from the other family? Tomás finally raised his eyes to meet mine. There was a pain there I had never seen before. "No, Mom. Between Eduardo and me." The world stopped. The sound of traffic outside, the ticking of the clock on the wall. Everything disappeared. There was only my son's face and the words he had just spoken. "The test said there is no genetic compatibility between us," Tomás continued, his voice monotone, as if he had rehearsed these words many times. "Eduardo is not my biological father." My hands began to shake so much that I had to set the glass down on the table to keep from spilling it. Memories from 25 years ago flooded my mind. The quick romance with Eduardo after the breakup with Miguel, the discovery of the pregnancy that I attributed to Eduardo without questioning, the hasty wedding. "When was this test done?" I managed to ask, my voice unrecognizable even to myself. 10 years ago, Tomás answered. When Eduardo took me to do those exams that he said were for a premium life insurance for the whole family. Do you remember? He insisted it was just routine, but you didn't need to do them because you had recently had a checkup. I vaguely remembered. Eduardo had always taken care of the family's financial part, the insurance policies, the investments. I never questioned it. 10 years. I repeated, doing mental calculations. That's when his trips to Buenos Aires became more frequent. Tomas nodded. I found more things, Mom. Correspondence between Dad and a private investigator. He had you investigated 10 years ago. He discovered about an ex-boyfriend of yours from your college days. Miguel, I whispered, feeling the ground crumble beneath my feet. Miguel Vega, confirmed Tomas. Brother of Lucia Vega, the woman with whom Dad has a family in Buenos Aires. The connection I feared moments before was materializing in an even more terrible way than I could have imagined. Eduardo discovered that you and Miguel had an encounter weeks before you met Eduardo, continued Tomas, each word a sharp blade cutting through the last vestiges of the life I thought I had. The investigator raised the hypothesis that I could be Miguel's son, not Eduardo's. I closed my eyes, trying to organize my thoughts. It was true that I had seen Miguel weeks before meeting Eduardo. We had ended a 4-year relationship painfully, and I made one last desperate attempt at reconciliation. Miguel wouldn't see me, sent his younger sister to dismiss me. Later, I learned he had moved abroad. But could it have been possible? Miguel and I hadn't met that last time. Or had we? The memory of a night, weeks earlier, emerged as a confused blur. A farewell party for a mutual friend. Too much to drink, loud music, an encounter in the bar bathroom. Miguel, me. Unspoken words, bodies that recognized each other despite the time apart. My God, I murmured, bringing my hands to my mouth. It's true, isn't it? Asked Tomas, his voice a mixture of accusation and plea. Is there a possibility that Miguel Vega is my biological father? I looked at my son, his dark eyes, his wavy hair, his fine nose, traits I had always attributed to my family. But now, with doubt planted, I could see in his face features that were neither mine nor Eduardo's. Yes, I finally admitted, a single tear running down my face. It's possible, but I never doubted you were Eduardo's son. The dates coincided. Almost. Miguel and I. It was just once, weeks before I met your father. I thought there was no possibility. Tomas nodded slowly, as if each piece of a puzzle was finally fitting into place. That explains everything, he said, his voice breaking. That's why Eduardo started treating me differently after those exams. That's why he sought out Lucia in Buenos Aires. It was revenge, Mom. A calculated, cold revenge, spanning a decade. What do you mean? Lucia is Miguel's sister. Eduardo deliberately sought her out after discovering about you and Miguel, about me. He created a family with the sister of the man he believed was my biological father. A real family, with children who are truly his. The perversity of Eduardo's plan left me breathless. The physical, emotional betrayal wasn't enough. He had designed an elaborate revenge, using people as pawns, creating lives just to punish me for a mistake I didn't even know I had made. Dad told me last night, after you went to the room, continued Tomas, wiping tears away, angrily. He said he had been planning this confession for months, that the only reason for revealing it now is because Lucia is really sick and wants her children, his legitimate children, to be recognized. And because he thinks you deserve to know the truth about me. I felt a fury growing inside me, a fury I had never experienced before. Not because Eduardo had another family. That was devastating enough on its own. But because of the calculated cruelty, the manipulation of so many lives. What else did he say? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, contrasting with the internal storm I felt. That Miguel returned to Argentina 24 years ago, shortly after you broke up with him. That he doesn't know about me. That Lucia never knew about the connection between you two until recently. That," he hesitated, "that he's going to legally recognize the other children when he returns, give them his name, and that, if I want, I can meet my real father." Each word was a new blow. The idea that Eduardo had spent years planning this revelation, carefully choosing the most humiliating possible moment, our wedding anniversary party, showed a level of cruelty that I couldn't reconcile with the man I thought I had known for 25 years. "What are we going to do, Mom?" asked Tomas, suddenly seeming very young, very vulnerable. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control. The years of training as a therapist would not be in vain. I needed to think clearly, despite the pain. "First, we're going to confirm everything," I said firmly. "We are not going to accept Eduardo's word as absolute truth, not after so many lies. We're going to redo the DNA test, you and I, and we're going to find this Miguel Vega." Tomas nodded, a small glimmer of hope emerging in his eyes. For the first time since the night before, I saw something other than despair in my son's face. "Doe, you know where to find him?" he asked. "No," I admitted. "But I know who might." Tomas understood immediately. "Lucia. Exactly. The woman Eduardo says is dying of cancer. The woman who tried to contact me before the party. The woman who, curiously, is the sister of the man who might be my son's real father." In the days that followed, my life took a turn in ways I never imagined. I hired a private investigator recommended by a former patient, someone discreet, efficient, and with no connections to Eduardo. I consulted my lawyers about how to proceed with the separation and division of assets, anticipating a difficult legal battle. And finally, I did what I should have done as soon as I received that first message. I responded to Lucia. "We need to talk, without Eduardo, just the two of us." The response came almost immediately. "Thank you. It's all I asked for. Can I call you now?" While waiting for the call, I tried to imagine what this woman, who had shared my husband for almost 2 decades, would be like. Would she be young and beautiful? Had she stolen Eduardo with tricks? Or was she like me, a victim of his cruel games? When the phone rang and I answered, the voice on the other end surprised me. It wasn't the resentful tone of a triumphant mistress. It was a tired, tense voice with a slight Argentine accent. "Marina, I'm Lucia Vega. Thank you for talking to me." "Why did you try to contact me before the party?" I asked directly, without beating around the bush. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Because I discovered the truth just 2 weeks ago," she finally responded. "About you, about your son, about my brother, about Eduardo's reasons for starting our relationship." "What reasons?" "Revenge." The word hung between us, loaded with meaning. "He sought me out deliberately, Marina. It wasn't a casual encounter, on a business trip as he always told me. He found me because I'm Miguel's sister, because he wanted to punish both of you." I felt a chill run down my spine, the confirmation of my worst fears. "How did you discover this?" "I found the same folder your son found," explained Lucia. "Eduardo has an apartment here in Buenos Aires, where we spend weekends with the children. There's an office there, always locked. When my diagnosis came 3 months ago, I started organizing my affairs, thinking about the children, their future. I wanted to make sure Eduardo had everything legally documented. Using a spare key he didn't know I had, I opened the office and found the folder with the DNA test, old photos of you with my brother, everything." "Is it true that you're sick?" I asked, still suspicious. Stage 4. Metastasis. 3 to 6 months, according to the doctors, she responded with a brutal frankness that left no room for doubt. That's why I confronted Eduardo. That's why I demanded he legally recognize our children. Not for me, but for them. I never imagined he would use this to hurt you publicly. Believe it or not, I tried to stop him. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. How could I? We were two women deceived by the same man, manipulated in a cruel game we didn't choose to play. You said Eduardo wanted to punish your brother too. Where is Miguel now? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. In Mendoza. He has a winery there, lives a quiet life. He never married. She made a significant pause. He never got over you, you know? Even after all these years. The revelation caught me off guard. Miguel had never moved on. Why did he refuse to see me that last time then? Why did he send you to dismiss me? The silence on the other end of the line extended for so many seconds that I thought the call had dropped. Marina, Miguel never refused to see you, Lucia finally replied, her voice now a whisper. I lied to you that day. The ground disappeared beneath my feet. What? I was 20, young, stupid, and in love with Eduardo, confessed Lucia, her voice breaking with emotion. We met at a university party, months before you broke up with Miguel. Eduardo was there on business. He was older, successful, charming. I started seeing him secretly, even knowing he was interested in you. When you and my brother broke up, and you went looking for him to reconcile, Eduardo asked me to interfere. He said he loved you, but needed time to end things with me first. He asked me to keep you away from Miguel temporarily. And God, Marina, I told you my brother was with someone else, that he didn't want to see you. In reality, he had gone to Mendoza just for a few days to visit our parents. The implications of that confession were devastating. The entire course of my life had been altered by a lie told by a 20-year-old girl manipulated by the same man who would spend the next decades lying to both of us. When Miguel returned and discovered you had disappeared, he was devastated, continued Lucia. He tried to find you, but you had changed your number, your address. Weeks later, he learned you were with Eduardo. By then, I had already realized he had used me to get to you, to separate you. I pulled away, hurt, humiliated. Years later, he reappeared in Buenos Aires, saying he had made the biggest mistake of his life, that he realized it was me he truly loved. And you believed him? I asked, incredulous. I wanted to believe him, she replied with painful honesty. I was young. I had never forgotten him. And the idea that the man I loved had realized his mistake and come back to me, it was irresistible. Only much later did I understand it was another game, another manipulation. But by then, we had children, a life together, and I was in love with an illusion. Tomás entered the room at that moment, his eyes questioning. I gestured for him to wait and put the phone on speaker. Lucia, my son is here with me. You mentioned that Miguel never knew about him. Never, she confirmed. I didn't know until 2 weeks ago, when I saw the DNA test. Miguel has no idea he might have a son. I need his contact information, I finally said, having made a decision. Tomás deserves to know the truth, and perhaps I also need closure after all these years. Lucia didn't hesitate to provide the number and address of Miguel's winery in Mendoza. Before hanging up, she said something that would stay with me for the days that followed. Marina, I never believed in fate or cosmic coincidences, but sometimes I think there's a justice in the universe that operates in long, unpredictable cycles. Eduardo tried to destroy us all. Perhaps unwittingly, he created the possibility of fixing what he broke so many years ago. When I hung up, Tomas was looking at me with a mixture of fear and hope. "Are we going to Argentina?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Yes," I replied, feeling a determination I hadn't experienced in years. "But first, we need to prepare." The following days were a whirlwind of activities. The DNA test that Tomas and I took confirmed, without a shadow of doubt, that he was my biological son. That, at least, had never been in question. My lawyers began preparing the divorce documentation, investigating Eduardo's finances, which, as we suspected, had serious irregularities. A deeper search conducted by the investigator I hired revealed that Eduardo had diverted considerable amounts from the company over the last 15 years. Money that presumably supported his second family and the luxurious apartment in Puerto Madero. Ironically, Eduardo's meticulously planned revenge would be his own undoing. The diversion of resources constituted a crime, and now we had evidence. 5 days after the confession, Tomas and I boarded a flight to Mendoza. The journey was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts, anticipating the meeting that could change our lives forever. Miguel's winery was located on the slopes of a mountain, with a view of endless valleys covered in vineyards. It was October, spring in the southern hemisphere, and the vines were covered with tender green shoots, promises of grapes that would one day transform into wine. We hadn't announced we were coming. Part of me feared that, if Miguel knew, he might refuse to see us. An irrational fear, perhaps, but understandable after so many lies and manipulations. An employee led us to the main house, a rustic and elegant stone and wood construction. And there, on the terrace that opened onto the vineyards, was he. Miguel Vega was 60 now, his hair completely gray, some wrinkles marking his tanned face. But his eyes, those dark, deep eyes that had captivated me in my youth, remained the same. And when he raised them and saw me standing there after 28 years, the recognition was instantaneous. "Marina?" He stood up, knocking over the book he was reading. "My God, is it really you?" "Hello, Miguel," I managed to say, my voice firmer than I expected. "Sorry for showing up like this, without warning. But we need to talk." His eyes shifted to the young man at my side, and for a moment I saw confusion on his face. Then something changed in his expression, a sudden understanding, a revelation that seemed to shake his world. "Is this Tomas?" I introduced, feeling my heart accelerate. "My son." Miguel invited us in, his hands trembling slightly as he poured wine for the three of us. In the comfort of the winery's living room, we told the whole story. The end of our relationship, Lucia's lie, my hasty marriage to Eduardo, the birth of Tomas, and finally, Eduardo's elaborate revenge and devastating confession. Miguel listened to everything in silence, his face a mask of contained emotions. Shock, anger, sadness, and something else. Something that looked like hope. "I always felt something was wrong," he said finally when we finished. "When I came back from Mendoza and found out you had disappeared, and then that you were with Eduardo, it seemed impossible. We had plans, Marina. I had bought a ring I was going to propose to you that week. The revelation hit me like lightning. A ring? Marriage? The life we could have had destroyed by interwoven lies. Why didn't you look for me?" I asked, the pain of decades of separation present in my voice. "I did," he answered simply. for months. But you had changed everything, phone, address. Your friends said you were happy, in love, moving on. And then I heard about the wedding, so quick. I thought maybe I had never meant to you what you meant to me. Tomas watched our interaction intently, his eyes, so similar to Miguel's, I realized now, absorbing every word, every gesture. "And you're a winemaker," he said suddenly, breaking a brief silence. "Just like I always wanted to be." Miguel looked at him with surprise. "You're interested in wines?" "Since I can remember," confirmed Tomas. "It's always been a hobby. I have a small collection. I took some wine tasting courses. Eduardo, my father, always thought it was a waste of time. He insisted I study law, follow a solid career." Miguel smiled for the first time since our arrival, a smile that lit up his face and revealed the same dimples that Tomas had. "Would you like to see the winery? We're in the middle of spring pruning. It's a fascinating time to understand the process." The rest of the afternoon passed like a dream. Miguel showed Tomas the property, explaining processes, sharing knowledge, discovering affinities that transcended time and distance. I observed them from afar, feeling a bittersweet mixture of joy and sadness. Joy at seeing my son connect with his biological father, sadness for the lost years, for the choices we couldn't make. As night fell, we sat down to dinner on the terrace under a starry sky that seemed infinite. It was then that Miguel asked the question we had all been avoiding. "What happens now?" Tomas looked at me, then at Miguel, the uncertainty evident on his young face. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm going to divorce Eduardo, that's for sure. My lawyers are already preparing everything. The evidence of money diverted from his company is enough to ensure I get a fair share of the assets, despite the prenuptial agreement I signed." "And me?" asked Tomas, his voice almost a whisper. "I mean, legally, Eduardo is my father. He raised me. But biologically, that only matters if it matters to you," Miguel said kindly. "I'm not here to take anyone's place, Tomas. But if you want to get to know me, if you want to explore this part of your identity, I'm here. I always will be." That night at the winery marked the beginning of something new for all of us. Not an erasure of the past, but a reformulation of the future. We stayed in Mendoza for 2 more days, enough time to establish what Miguel called bridges to the future. Ways to stay in touch, to build a relationship that, though late, could still be meaningful. Before leaving, Miguel found me alone on the terrace, watching the sunrise over the vineyards. "He's amazing, Marina," he said, stopping beside me. "You did an extraordinary job raising him." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. "He's the best thing I've ever done in my life." We stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of decades of separation and secrets float between us. "I always wondered what it would have been like," Miguel finally said, "if we had stayed together, if Lucia hadn't lied that day." "Me too," I admitted, "especially in the difficult moments with Eduardo. But I think we can't live on what-ifs, Miguel. The past is what it is." "And the future?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine, the same intensity that had captivated me in my youth still present. "The future is open," I responded honestly. "I need to sort out my life first. The divorce, financial reorganization supporting Tomas through this transition. But after that..." I left the sentence unfinished, an unspoken promise floating in the morning air. Miguel smiled, understanding. "I'll wait," he said simply. "I've waited 28 years. I can wait a little longer. When Tomas and I boarded our flight back home, something had fundamentally changed. The pain of Eduardo's betrayal was still there. But now there was also a sense of possibility, of paths opening up where before we only saw dead ends. The return flight gave us time to think, to plan. Tomas decided he would continue using Eduardo's surname officially. After all, it was the identity he had known all his life. But he wanted to spend more time in Mendoza, learning about winemaking with Miguel. Perhaps, he said with a glimmer of enthusiasm in his eyes, he could even open an Argentine wine import business in the future. As for me, I decided it was time to use everything I had learned as a therapist to heal myself. Years of helping others, overcome trauma and rebuild lives. And now it was my turn to apply that knowledge. It wouldn't be easy. The pain of betrayal, the magnitude of the deception, the cold and calculated manipulation. All of this would leave scars. But scars are just memories of wounds that have healed. Eduardo returned from Buenos Aires 2 weeks later, as he had promised. He arrived at the apartment expecting to find a devastated woman, begging for explanations, perhaps even willing to forgive to keep up appearances. Instead, he found a house empty of personal effects, a court order preventing him from accessing several bank accounts, and a dossier detailing the financial diversions he had committed over the years. I wasn't there to see his reaction. I didn't need to be. I had rented a small apartment near my office, taking only what was truly mine. Tomas was temporarily in Mendoza, starting an internship at Miguel's winery. The call came that same night. Eduardo, furious, threatening. "You can't do this to me, Marina. Destroy everything I built. Why? Because I had another family? Because your precious son isn't mine?" "No, Eduardo," I replied, surprisingly calm. "I'm doing this because you lied. Not just about the other family, but about everything. You built our marriage on a foundation of lies. You used people like pieces in a perverse game of chess. You manipulated lives for your personal satisfaction, and now you're reaping what you've sown." "I'll fight this," he threatened. "I have the best lawyers. You won't get a penny beyond what's in the prenuptial agreement." "You can try," I replied, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "But before hiring those expensive lawyers, I suggest you read the complete dossier I left. Especially the part about how your partners will react when they learn about the diversions, and how the tax agency will be interested in the undeclared deposits in offshore accounts. Oh, and don't forget to check the status of your shell company in Buenos Aires. It seems there was an anonymous report to the Argentine tax authorities." A stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You wouldn't do that," he finally said, arrogance giving way to fear. It would destroy Tomas, too. His inheritance. "Tomas already knows everything," I cut him off. "And he's decided he'd rather build his own path. With his real father, by the way. They're getting along very well." Another long pause. "What do you want, Marina?" he finally asked, his voice defeated. "Justice," I answered simply. "Not revenge, mind you. I'm not like you. But justice, yes. For me, for Tomas, even for Lucia and her children. My lawyers will contact yours tomorrow. I suggest you be reasonable. I have much more evidence than I've shown so far." I hung up without waiting for a response. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from relief, from certainty, from newly discovered power. The divorce was finalized in record time. Eduardo, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his questionable financial activities, agreed to an extremely favorable settlement for me. He preferred to lose money than risk losing his freedom. To everyone's surprise, he sold his share in the construction company, liquidated most of his assets in the country, and moved permanently to Argentina. I learned from Lucia that he had rented a smaller apartment in Buenos Aires, closer to the hospital where she was receiving treatment. Perhaps in the end, there was some kind of redemption even for Eduardo. Weeks turned into months. Lucia, contrary to medical predictions, responded well to an experimental treatment. The doctors were now talking about years, not months. Tomas divided his time between the enology program he had started in Mendoza and visits to Buenos Aires, getting to know his half-siblings, building relationships he had never imagined having. As for Miguel and me, well, we started slowly. Nightly calls that stretched for hours, occasional visits, him on business to my city, me with the pretext of visiting Tomas in Mendoza. A friendship that naturally evolved into something more, without rush, without overwhelming expectations. After all, we carried complex histories, entire lives lived separately. There was much to rediscover, to relearn. 6 months after Eduardo's confession, I received an unexpected invitation. Lucia wanted to meet me in person. I confess I hesitated. Despite our phone conversations having been cordial, there was an inherent strangeness in meeting the woman who had shared my husband for so long. But there was also something liberating in the idea of closing this chapter, face to face. We met at a neutral cafe in Buenos Aires, 2 middle-aged women united by an unlikely story. She was thinner due to the treatment, but her eyes had a vivacity that spoke of someone determined to live each day fully. "Thank you for coming," she said when we sat down. "I know it's strange. Life rarely follows the script we plan," I replied, surprising myself with the ease of the conversation. "I think we both learned that the hard way." Lucia smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "Eduardo is changing," she said after a moment. "The fear of losing me, of having to raise the children alone. Something broke in him. He's in therapy, did you know?" I couldn't help but laugh. Ironic, isn't it? After years of hearing me talk about the importance of therapy. "He said something interesting last week," continued Lucia, "that all the revenge he planned for years ended up resulting in exactly the opposite of what he intended. He wanted to punish you and my brother, but ended up reuniting you. He wanted to ensure Tomas would never know his biological father, but now they're inseparable. He wanted to keep 2 families separate, controlling both, and now we're all connected in ways he never imagined." There was a profound wisdom in that observation. Life has a peculiar way of finding its own balance, of correcting injustices through tortuous and unexpected paths. "How are things with Miguel?" asked Lucia, changing the subject. I felt a blush rise to my face, something I hadn't experienced in decades. "We're rediscovering each other," I answered honestly. "It's complicated and simple at the same time, as if we had the chance to pick up something that should never have ended. He deserves to be happy," Lucia said sincerely. "And so do you, Marina, after everything you both went through. Making a mistake at 20 shouldn't define an entire life." I looked at this woman who, in another life, could have been my enemy, and felt an unexpected connection. We had both been pawns in Eduardo's game, but we had reclaimed our autonomy, our own stories. "And you, Lucia? What do you want for the future?" She looked out the cafe window to the vibrant city outside. "Time," she answered simply. "Time to see my children grow up, to correct the mistakes I made, to live the life I choose, not the one that was chosen for me." When I returned to my hotel that night, I received a message from Miguel. "How was it?" "Healing," I replied. "Like an old wound finally beginning to properly heal." "You are an extraordinary woman, Marina." He wrote back, "You always were." You always will be. Lying in the hotel bed, I reflected on the extraordinary events of the past months. Eduardo's devastating confession. Tomas's tears who knew part of the truth but tried to protect me. The discovery of a buried past, of connections that transcended time and distance. The pain of betrayal, yes, but also the liberation that comes with truth, no matter how painful it may be. At 53, I was starting again, not from scratch. I carried with me the acquired wisdom, the scars that made me stronger, the love for my son that would never diminish. But there were new paths opening up, possibilities I never imagined would exist for someone my age. On our wedding anniversary, Eduardo said, "I have a confession," and my son cried before I could comprehend the magnitude of what was to come. That moment, which seemed like the end of my world, turned out to be the beginning of something authentic, true, a life not built on lies, but on conscious choices, genuine connections, and the courage to face the truth, no matter how frightening it may be. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson I learned in this journey. It's never too late for the truth. It's never too late to start again. And sometimes, what seems to be the end of everything is just the prologue to a much richer, much truer story waiting to be written. And so it was that, on a sunny spring morning in Mendoza, a year after the Ahura confession that changed everything, Miguel took me to a lookout point in the vineyards. The valley stretched below us, the young grape clusters promising an exceptional vintage. 29 years ago, I had a ring and a question, he said, holding my hands. Time took us down different paths, but here we are, back at the place where we should have been. We can't erase the past, Miguel, I responded, feeling tears forming. We have histories, entire lives. I don't want to erase anything. He interrupted gently. Every choice, every mistake, every joy and pain brought us here. All of that is part of who we are. And it's that person, complete, with all her experiences and scars, whom I love. When he knelt down, taking a small box from his pocket, it wasn't the same ring from 29 years ago. It was a new one, symbolizing not what could have been, but what could be from now on. Marina Acosta, will you build a new story with me? And there, under the Mendoza sun, with vineyards that symbolized renewal and growth surrounding us, I said the yes I should have said decades ago. Not with regret for the lost time, but with gratitude for the chance to start again. That same day, we received the news. Tomas and his Argentine girlfriend, a young winemaker he had met at the university, were expecting a baby. Life, in its infinite wisdom, offered not only second chances, but new generations, new beginnings. Sometimes when I look back at the woman I was, the wife blind to the lies, the therapist who couldn't heal her own wounds, I feel a deep tenderness. She did the best she could with the information she had, and when the truth finally came to light, she found the strength not just to survive, but to flourish. What Eduardo never understood, in his pursuit of revenge, is that the truth, no matter how painful it may be initially, always liberates. Lies build prisons. Truths, even the most difficult ones, open doors. And so, life continued. Not as I had planned at 25, nor as I imagined at 50, but as something completely new and unexpectedly precious. I moved to Mendoza permanently 6 months later, maintaining online consultations for some old patients. Miguel and I married in an intimate ceremony among the vineyards, with Tomas walking me down the improvised aisle. Lucia survived 3 more years, enough time to see her first grandchild born, to make peace with her past, to witness how her youthful lie ended up being corrected by time and destiny. Eduardo, surprisingly, remained by her side until the end. A man transformed by the proximity of loss, by the confrontation with the consequences of his choices. When Thomas and his wife Clara presented us with our grandson, a dark-eyed boy with wavy black hair like his father and grandfather, I felt a circle closing. There, in my arms, was the living proof that even in the most complicated stories, in the most tortuous paths, there can be beauty, continuity, hope. "What are you going to name him?" I asked, cradling the small bundle pulsing with new life. "Tomas," and Clara exchanged a knowing look. "Miguel Eduardo Vega Acosta," my son announced, "to honor all the paths that brought us here." I looked at Miguel, my husband, who contemplated his grandson with tears in his eyes. I thought of Eduardo, who, despite all his mistakes, had been the man who raised Tomas. I thought of Lucia, whose actions, both the mistaken and the redemptive, uns, had shaped our collective destiny. We are all, in the end, products of choices, ours and others. We are all, inevitably, storytellers, reviewing and rewriting the narratives of our lives as new information emerges, as new perspectives open. On our wedding anniversary, Eduardo said, "I have a confession." And my son cried before I could understand why. That moment, which seemed like the end, was actually the beginning of a journey that took me through pain, anger, and finally, to liberation. From lie to truth, from illusion to authenticity. And if there's a lesson I learned, which I now share with my patients with a conviction that comes from lived experience, it's this: it's never too late for the truth. It's never too late to start again. It's never too late to be who you really are, to live the life that should have always been yours. Eduardo's confession was the end of my castle of lies and the beginning of my true love story.